understand non-aggression is going to be difficult because certainly plenty of aggression in said Christian Hebrew scriptures.
What do you mean Abraham was going to kill his son?
But I did target only people who like Rothbard, Mises, Hayek, the free market, libertarianism. So some of those guys go in there.
Well, there's often, I find,
Did you want to?
Yeah.
at some conferences, and what's occasionally an uncomfortable, at least for me, connection between some very libertarian thinkers and religion. I was on a webinar with a brilliant economist through IHS. He's from a university in Alabama. And he's very, very, sort of devoutly, whatever that type of Christianity is down there. And, and that's cool.
Uh-huh.
I find some of it a little odd,
Uh-huh.
but, it's...
And contradictory.
And oftentimes very contradictory. I could see if you were, again, in that sort of post-Christian ilk, the ethical societies, the progressives, the Unitarians, the UCCs. But, some of the...
Deeply steeped in like Bible.
Right.
That's... There's a guy who writes for Blue Rockwell, I forget his name. He's really anti-war. Do you remember who that is? We saw him, or you watch him when we were down in Mises. He's a big guy with beard. Anyway,
Yeah,
he's
I
really
noticed.
Christian.
There's one guy that even wrote a textbook called Textbook about something like Austrian economics and Christianity.
Well, and I bet if you were to look just at the, the parts of Christian scriptures that are attributed to the Nazarene, you probably could make a connection. But to take that as a work as a whole,
Yeah. I mean,
when anyone's ever read like the book of Numbers, it's
Exactly.
like, cool.
Yeah.
And it's awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but it's not a...
The Jews were, conquering, killing, salting the earth.
We must kill all of the
Right.
Philistines, including
Exactly.
babies and
Their
their
breathing,
dogs.
not even plants left.
Right.
What's interesting is how the subject of interest has been controversial through all religions, basically. Most
Yeah,
religions.
interest, yeah. Did you read Rothbard's History of Economic Thought?
Mhm.
Yeah. So that was a great.
Yeah. So
I
it's
like how he traces how in some, scholastics, they got closer and
Oh,
closer.
right, like the Spanish scholastics were very close to figuring out sort of the time preference and how
Right.
interest worked.
Because they think like, well, it's not really unethical because I have to give up my money, so you can charge some interest, and then the next guy would be like,
Oh, right, and then they didn't try, the interest equivalent of like the labor theory, labor value theory, and that is like, there was like you could have a just interest, which was, something, say,
can
some
see that
magical-
10% is like
Right.
what God has granted.
Right, God
Right.
said, yes, 4 to 6% okay, anything else is a mortal sin and you're all going to hell.
Exactly.
Like, what?
They're exploiting,
that's interesting. It's people, even non-religious people, still agree with that. Think that payday loans are immoral and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like Elizabeth Warren is a good example.
Hiawatha.
Yeah.
Hiawatha. That's what my friend calls her.
She was, I believe, what's it, like 1/16 or 32nd?
What she claims to be, but I guess
Yeah.
there's no proof.
Yeah.
It's funny that by targeting payday loans, payday lenders, she's targeting Native Americans because they're the ones who
Yeah,
generally...
certainly if you're out in the desert Southwest.
Everywhere, yeah. I guess because of the favorable tax and regulation and everything, or
Hiawatha.
so,
Well, if you're coming to our casino, why not stop off first at our payday
Oh,
lender?
I see. They benefit from it.
well, they operate online usually, sometimes really aggressively, I guess. They're owned and operated within reservations usually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Oh, and then their regulation is completely based on the treaties, and that's really complicated.
Let's get going.
All right. So before we begin, we have the obligatory Heidelmesis.
Yeah. I said there might be new people coming, so keep, make them feel welcome. Just as like I'll cut down on my Heidelmesis.
It's technically fun pieces.
Yes.
To
be
no
proper-
property there.
Proper respect.
All right, well, let's start, but I guess just, this is the 1-year anniversary of this thing, so let's start with a moment of silence. Everyone wants to bow their head. Let's just stop and think for a minute. It's been a year we've been doing this, and we've learned a lot, and each time we do it, it feels very satisfactory, It might be a small group we have, there might only be a few people interested at this point, but I feel like we as a group are moving forward and our ideas are advancing, so, I enjoy it. I enjoy hanging out with you guys, I enjoy seeing you once a month, and it's a great thing we're trying here, to actually have a community built around liberty. So it's just good to reflect about that, and this is 1 year and 1 week since we started in this room. So it's been a good year. So does somebody want to volunteer to do, I think next we're going to just do this dedication to liberty. Somebody want to volunteer to read that? No, I can do it. Chris? Okay.
We are gathered today to assert and affirm our beliefs. We believe that every individual owns his or her own life and property. We believe that ownership is complete and unconditional. We believe that no person or persons are ever justified in using aggression to violate that ownership. We believe a world without any coercive state is possible. We believe that such a world would be preferable and is, in fact, necessary for our continued existence as a species. We hereby commit ourselves to work by whatever means necessary to bring about that world. Listen, you up?
Thanks, Chris. So today I'm going to talk about my personal testimony of liberty. Why am I libertarian? And I think I've always been inclined towards liberty. I've always had a feeling that I know what's best for myself, and I've, to some degree, been anti-authoritarian. And my dad was an entrepreneur, and seeing him pursue his own dreams also affected me too. So I guess I've been self-identified as a libertarian since I was about 16. And shortly after 9/11, I decided to join the Marine Corps because I felt that I was going to be defending the ideals of liberty. I was a minarchist at the time. I wasn't even really introduced to the concepts of anarchy and didn't understand them. And so I thought I was doing, fighting for a just cause, and that I would be implementing my resources towards those ends. So my experience, when I became disillusioned with the concept of the state and also the U.S. government through a series of events that occurred over the next 5 or so years. I guess you could start with in boot camp. You expect, you're going to be yelled at and everything, and that's what I signed up for, expecting that. That's not what was a surprise. But there were some events that really, I was awaken to the concept that your life is meaningless. You're just a tool. And that really upset me. So for example, one night I was on fire watch where you have to stand guard. And it was like 2 a.m. And I had just gotten off my shift and someone came and replaced me. And this drunk drill instructor, he'd just come back from partying, walked in. He wasn't our drill instructor, he was someone else's. He walked in and started harassing the guy that was on fire watch. And if he had been 5 minutes earlier, that would have been me. He proceeded to beat the crap out of him and kind of like curbed him on a box, on a shoe box, so he lost teeth and stuff. And he didn't suffer any repercussions. This was all hushed up. That was just one example of where that kind of power leads to abuse. And after that, there was a situation where people started coming down with a strange disease, and it turned out to be a dangerous kind of strep A. And people would get weird rashes, and then they would like fall down and pass out. And 4 people that we know of died, and initially the Marine Corps tried to hide this. And I was one of the first people to get it. And I was up in the mountains in Camp Pendleton at the time. We were doing field training. And I didn't get any skin rashes like some of the other people, but I started to feel like I was getting pneumonia. And I didn't want to get treated because then you basically get held back. And you don't want to get held back. You want to graduate on schedule. Well, by hiding it, I ended up getting much sicker to the point where I passed out and they had to medevac me to the hospital. I ended up having a fever of 108. I lost half my hearing, basically. And I still feel like I have some brain damage since that day. Well, I spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering. And for the next, after that, I spent another, 3 weeks in they call it like the sick platoon, where people are recovering from injuries. And this really also affected me, seeing how people, there was so much despair. They felt like they were trapped and they couldn't get out. And obviously it wasn't working out for these individuals, but because they signed a contract, they had no control over their life. Most of them would have been better off just going home and forgetting about whatever, ever graduating. But they didn't have those choices. They weren't in control of their life. So one example is there was an individual who had the same thing I did, but his brain damage was worse, much worse, to the fact that he developed a really strong lisp and could hardly talk. He was just stuttering and stammering. And so, for example, even to just say, "Yes, sir," would be like, "Yes, sir." And the drill instructors would make fun of him. I mean, a couple weeks ago, he was a relatively normal person. And I just couldn't help but to think that if that were my son, how pissed off I would be. I would almost rather that he had died in combat or something where you could kind of rationalize that he did, something towards a good cause. But that just irritated me, that the way that they harassed him. And it really just made me feel like everyone's life was worthless to the state. And this is how people were treated. There's more stories, but after graduation, it was more of the same. You had no control of your life, and that was a terrible feeling. I was injured after boot camp, and this also, influenced. I still have nerve damage to this day in my hip, but the way that, I was treated because I was different and I couldn't, go running like everyone else, and so I was made to work basically from 5 a.m. to 10 p.m. If I couldn't exercise with everyone else up there, they're going to make me work. So I basically never saw daylight. Except for one day a week maybe. And then I was eventually sent to the Marine Corps Museum, and this was a relatively good gig because they were moving the museum to Quantico, and that was my job specialty, and I could also get better medical treatment as well as better treated by my peers and stuff overall. But being in the museum, I had full access to all of the history, military, and I really took advantage of that to learn and read about it. And this further disillusioned my view of what the military does. That almost all of our wars have been wars of choice and unnecessary. And so that really, this is when I really started to be for more peaceful foreign policy and against the military in general. But I was still an anarchist at the time. It wasn't until a couple of years after I got out when I became an anarchist. But right after I got out of the military, I met my wife, and then shortly thereafter we got married. And we had our wedding reception in Japan, and then we were going to have we had our wedding in Japan. We were going to have a reception in the States for my family. Well, it turns out she didn't have the right visa to enter the country, and so they denied her entry. She couldn't even attend her own wedding. Her parents could come, but she couldn't come. And my poor wife, she was 20 at the time. She was treated like a criminal, and they made her fly all the way back. She basically spent 3 days in an airplane, and we flew on separate airplanes, and we had no communication during this time, and it was just a nerve-wracking experience for everyone, our families and everything. And it took us 5 years to finish the immigration process. And they told us that she couldn't enter the country again until she got her green card. Right? She couldn't just come and visit because she was treated like a criminal. And when we got to the final step, they told us, "Oh, there's a flag on your application. That means you'll never be able to enter." Even though 5 years ago they told us that it would be cleared up. After, at the very end of the process, after spending like 10 grand in 5 years, going through all the paperwork and stuff, they told us, "Oh, she'll never be able to enter. Unless you can prove that there's undue burden on the citizen, on me." And we're like, "Oh, that's easy. Undue burden, let's see. Affecting my career, splitting up my family, stopping me from finishing my education, what?" No, none of those. In fact, I even was told, "We do not care about splitting up families. That is not a concern for us." And they even said, with a straight face, families live internationally split up all the time. So that's not a problem for you. Again, the government doesn't care how they affect your life or how they limit your choices in life. You're just a tool to them. And it was shortly after this that I started to become more aware of anarchist thought. And I had this little internal struggle because it was so radical of an idea, even though all my experiences had told me that the government is evil, the state is an evil institution. I finally was able to rationalize it and let go of my anarchist leanings. And I'm really hopeful about the future of liberty. And I hope that people don't have to go through experiences like mine to come to that conclusion. I hope that we can market it better and provide that information. If I had more information earlier, I wouldn't have joined the military. I would have had a totally different life. But on one hand, it's really good that maybe if I'm ever to be useful for the cause of liberty, maybe my negative experiences have helped reinforced my belief in liberty. But I forgot to answer why I was able to get my wife into the country. What they considered an undue burden was for health reasons. And so, because I was medically discharged from the Marine Corps, as well documented, I was able to use that as kind of a lame excuse, but as an excuse to say, well, I need her to take care of me. And so that's what it took. If I hadn't been hurt in the military, I wouldn't be living in America. I'd be still in Japan. So this is my testimony to liberty. I think that people are much more successful in terms of reaching their ends, and that the natural state of human condition is peaceful cooperation. I strongly believe that. There's a lot of philosophers who think otherwise, but I think that the state of nature for man is peaceful cooperation, and that incidences of violence among us is the exception, not the norm. That we don't need a coercive state to enforce our rights. I think that we respect each other generally, and that the state turns us against each other in many ways. So I hope for freedom, and this is my testimony.
Okay, just, would you like to read this, the reading, which is next? It's a passage from...
Oh, yeah, from God's speech. No, pleasure.
Just,
So I do think cold reading is one of my specialties. Great. Mind versus force. Whatever may be open to disagreement, there is one act of evil that may not. The act that no man may commit against others, and no man may sanction or forgive. So long as men desire to live together, no man may initiate, do you hear me? No man may start the use of physical force against others. To interpose a threat of physical destruction between a man and his perception of reality is to negate and paralyze his means for survival. To force him to act against his own judgment is like forcing him to act against his own sight. Whoever, to whatever purpose or extent, initiates the use of force is a killer acting on the premise of death in a manner wider than murder, the premise of destroying man's capacity to live. Do not open your mouth to tell me that your mind has convinced you of your right to force my mind. Force and mind are opposites. Morality ends where a gun begins. When you declare that men are rational animals and propose to treat them as such, you define thereby your own character and can no longer claim the sanction of reason, as no advocate of contradictions can claim it. There can be no right to destroy the source of rights. The only means of judging right from wrong, the mind. To force a man to drop his own mind and to accept your will as substitute, with a gun in place of the syllogism, with terror in place of proof, and death as the final argument, is to attempt to exist in defiance of reality. Reality demands of man that he act for his own rational interest. Your gun demands that he act against it. Reality threatens man with death if he does not act on his rational judgment. You threaten him with death if he does. It's excerpted from John Galt's speech in Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand.
Okay, so the topic of my sermon today is living a life for liberty. I want to talk about what that means, what that looks like, and why each of us should choose to live a life committed to liberty. And this is a topic that I don't think that we can think about too much. I don't think that we can discuss too much, because we have to be clear in our own mind what our expectations are, what the cost of committing ourselves to liberty is, and why we are doing it. We should be clear, because the more that we are conscious of what we're doing, the more fortitude it will give us when we come up to situations that maybe we had not anticipated, because we will have thought about it ahead of time. It's also important to be conscious of these things so that when we talk to others, we can convince them. If there's one thing that differentiates us, a core thing that differentiates us, or idea that differentiates us from everyone else, people believe in the state, it is that we believe that you can deal with people through their reason. We believe that there doesn't need to be a ruler or a ruled, that if you address somebody, you address their reason, they will respond. So we should have reasons about what we should be straightforward to people about what a life committed to liberty looks like and why they should do it. Now there's this debate that's going on right now in the liberty movement, and honestly it's probably been going on as long as people have been thinking about liberty, which has to do with how do we market this message. Probably everyone is aware, probably everyone has some opinion about this. The basic overview of what a lot of people in our movement say, the criticism they have of those of us who are passionate about liberty, is that we are going about it the wrong way, that the image that we have relative to other people who believe in the state or don't understand our ideas, that we are sort of shooting ourselves in the foot. What they basically say is, I understand the frustration that you feel when you see injustice in the world. I understand that makes you angry. But when you vent, it turns people off. This is what they say. They understand our ideas, they understand why we think these things, why we express anger when we see injustice, but they say, this is not helpful because it's not appealing to people. They say what libertarians or liberty-minded people frequently are, the impression that we give to other people is we're just furious at the world. And that's not appealing. This is the criticism they have. And the proposed solution that they come up with is what we should do is try to play up the positive parts of liberty. Try to make liberty more interesting or more exciting. Make liberty seem like a fun adventure. Make the cause of liberty something that there's a positive message. To way oversimplify what they say, the essence of it is, if you give people a spoonful of sugar, it'll help the medicine go down. Or another way of oversimplifying it would be, if you put a bow and ribbon around liberty, then people are going to want to unwrap it. And so this is, like I said, this is a discussion that's been going on for a long time. Now, I don't want to be overly critical of this position. I think that we have to consider these things. We have to consider how people see us. We always have to remember to fight clean, and stay on target and focus on the things that we don't like and not make ad hominem attacks. Don't make don't commit logical fallacies. These things are important. But there is a danger in pursuing their line of thought too far. And the danger is that if you overly polish this message, if you customize and market it too much custom towards what they want, then you run the risk of bringing people in under false premises. In other words, if we tell people, the fight for liberty, this cause that we're in, it's a carnival ride. If we tell them it's, this is a day at the beach drinking with your friends, it's always fun and exciting. If we emphasize that too much, then people are going to expect that. And the fact of the matter is, this fight that we're in, these ideas, it's a struggle. There are millions of people who have a very vested interest in the state, in the perpetuation of this idea, who are going to fight hard against us succeeding. And like any battle, for us to advance in this cause, we have to have a sense of there's going to be disappointment, there's going to be setbacks. It's not always going to be fun. Now, no reasonable person expects that you can live a life without, we all know that adults need diversion, we need excitement, we need fun. I mean, everyone understands that, and so we should try to incorporate that as much as possible into what we're doing here and, you know, whenever we're doing stuff related to liberty. But if we overemphasize that, then we run the risk of bringing even the right people in under the wrong premises, or maybe even bringing the wrong people in completely. There's a specific type of person, I think, that we want to attract to this organization and to the liberty movement in general. And that's people like us. People who have the following attitude towards life. People who say, I'm an adult. Treat me like an adult. I understand that life is not always easy, and I understand that life is not always fun. But be honest with me. Be straightforward about me. If there's a problem in life that you see, bring it forward to me. Treat me like an equal. Treat me like a peer of yours. And be fair with me, and I will respond. And if you have a proposed solution, put that in front of me too, and I will respond to that. The mentality that says that everyone is a child that needs to be handled with lies, or who can't hear things that are uncomfortable or disturbing, is the same mentality that the politicians have. The idea that people can't take care of themselves, that people will not bear a burden because they don't want to. That's how they think of other people. We should treat people like adults. So the overview of this section is just to say, let's be straightforward with people and ourselves. It's not going to always be a day at the park what we're doing here. That's not why we're doing it. Now, if that being said, what do you say to someone? Let's imagine, just for the sake of illustrative purposes, to help us think this through. There's an 18-year-old who comes to one of us and says, I am trying to decide how to live my life. I'm trying to decide what values to pursue. And I've talked to the sensualists of the world, and I think I have a good idea of what it means to live a life pursuing pleasure and personal satisfaction. And I've talked to those who are powerful in the world, and I think they were straightforward, and I have a good sense of what it means to live a life pursuing power over others. And I've talked to the wealthy, and I think I have a good idea about what it means to live a life pursuing material gain and acquisition and luxury. Now you're telling me there's this other value in life that I can pursue, the pursuit of liberty. What is that all about? What can I expect from that life? And I mean, this is, like I said, illustrative. We all ask ourselves these questions all the time. There's competing values, right? So what does a life of liberty look like? And I think the answer that we have to give to that person, we have to give to ourselves when we ask that question, is that there's a prerequisite. If you want to live a life committed to liberty, there's one starting place that you have to begin with. To live a life committed to liberty, you have to first surrender yourself to a value. You have to surrender yourself to the principle, to the value that every person on earth is sovereign over their own body and their own possessions, and nobody on earth has the right to aggress against that. This is the starting point of living a life committed to liberty. You must surrender yourself to that value. And I use that word surrender very deliberately. It is a commitment. You're saying to yourself, I am going to fight for this value no matter what. No matter where my life takes me. I am going to fight for this value whether I end up in a gulag prison camp or everyone comes along and we achieve a free society in my lifetime. It doesn't matter. You have to live a life committed to liberty. You have to say to yourself, I am going to fight for this value. If I toil in obscurity, unknown, unrecognized, or if I reach the heights of fame, become a household name, known by millions, it doesn't matter. The prerequisite to living a life committed to liberty is to say that you are going to fight for this value, no matter if you are destitute, without money, in poverty, or that you achieve great wealth. It doesn't matter. It is this surrender to this value that is the first step to live a life for liberty. And a way of thinking about it is, there's this value that you're holding on to. And everything in life is moving around, but there's this one thing that you're holding on to. That's living a life committed to liberty. There's one central thing that you hold no matter what. And if you do this, if you commit to this, whenever these crises come up or whatever you have, you wonder which direction to take. If you continue to pursue this, what you will find is that your life is going to take an unorthodox path. There will not be role models that you can look to. There will not be, these ideas are relatively new. I mean, the idea of a stateless society in its modern form is really only a generation old. I mean, thinkers before us have cleared, explained how this could work. So our parents, our grandparents, the people we know who do not understand these ideas, our lives are going to be different. I mean, probably no one in this room has even one parent who would self-describe as a libertarian. Much less, and that's just a libertarian. That's not saying the state is evil and inherently illegitimate. I mean, that's taking it even further. So if you're going to surrender yourself to a value like this, that your life will, the model that you are thinking about how your life is going to work is going to be different. Own that fact. Accept that fact. Don't think that, you can live the same type of life as other people who do not have this as a central value. And knowing that and deciding that and recognizing that ahead of time will give you an advantage, because then when you find yourself on the proverbial road less traveled, when you find yourself without a map, not knowing where you are, what am I doing? You can say, well, I knew this was going to be different. I knew this was going to be unorthodox because I'm pursuing this value that other people are not. So a life committed to liberty will be unorthodox, and it will also be a life full of alienation. Something, again, that's unpleasant, but I think that we should be honest about. The more that you think about these ideas, and the more that you understand the philosophy of liberty, and the more that you understand how much better a world without the state could be, and how the state can take care of all these problems so much more better, so much in such a more efficient manner, and a world of more justice, the more deeper you get into these ideas, the more that when you walk around on the street, when you interact with people who do not understand these ideas, you are going to feel like there is a truth that you understand that is more profound than them. You're going to start feeling like there's a frame to life that they don't get. And you're going to start seeing like you can understand how they see, how they think. But they don't understand how you think because they don't see this. It really is a sensation that these people aren't of the same religion. That's why we originally thought to call this a religion, which maybe we won't end up doing. But I mean, it is that profound of a difference that you feel like you're amongst heathens. And what's going to happen is you will both feel alienation. I mean, you are going to have these ideas. You're going to have responses, attitude towards things that people don't understand. And you're going to, and you are not going to know how to deal with them, and they're not going to know how to deal with you. This is inherent to pursuing this value. Like this is, just accept it. The sooner you accept it, the better off you're going to be. Because when it happens, you're like, well, that's what I've chosen. I knew that this was going to be how my life would turn out. So a life committed to liberty will be unorthodox and unfamiliar. It will bring alienation. And what we're trying to do with the church is to reduce that. If we can actually start a community of people who all share these values, then you won't feel as much alienation. Even now, if one of you, if you see me like furious ranting or raving about something the government does, you don't think, oh, well, Steve's like, he's just furious at the world. You think this is a thoughtful guy who's having an appropriate reaction to an injustice, and so, the more that we grow this community and we're around people who are conversant in the ideas and share the same values, the level of alienation will drop, at least amongst ourselves. And if this organization continues for generations, then also the sense that we're completely in the desert will change too, because the next generation will have more models to look to. How did people come to terms with liberty? How did they live a life? So life will become less unorthodox. So we're trying to eliminate these things. But this is sort of par for the course now, if you choose this path. So a life committed to liberty requires a surrender of this value. It will, by almost for sure, bring make your life unorthodox. It will bring alienation to you. And it also requires sacrifice. And I don't mean sacrifice the way Ayn Rand used the term sacrifice. I agree with her. You should never sacrifice your values. But I mean a life committed to liberty requires sacrifice in the sense that when you surrender to this value, you are basically metaphorically saying, I'm going to enter into the competitive fray of life with one hand behind my back. Or more accurately, with one hand, a huge amount of my time and effort and resources spent fighting for a value that other people don't spend time on, don't really care about. Maybe they give lip service to it. They don't really, it doesn't take a lot out of them. So accept that that's how it's going to be, When you go out and you try to compete, for advancement in your job, you try to compete for affection from people, you try to compete for recognition, status. You are going to be going up against people who are fully invested in those things, who are fighting with two hands. And you are going to think to yourself, if only I could give up this value of liberty, I could run with these people, I could advance, I could succeed compared to them on all these different things. But since you have surrendered yourself to this value, it's you won't actually be able to, you'll be at a disadvantage. So just be honest about this. Recognize this fact up front. Recognize that this is the path you've chosen. And when you talk to people about liberty, don't hide it from them. Say this is the expectation. Now, this has so far been sort of a litany of negative things, like you're going to sacrifice alienation, it's an unorthodox life, you have to surrender to a value. This is not a very good sales pitch so far. The question is why? That's what we all struggle with, right? Why would we live this? Why would we choose all these things? And we have to have an answer to that for people and for ourselves. It is a matter of fact that every person on earth needs meaning in their life. They need purpose. People need to be part of something greater than themselves. When a person has an ambition to gain something for themselves as an individual, when they want to go out and succeed in the world, gain material things, get recognition for themselves, whenever they act on that, whenever they have that instinct, there is a compensatory, perhaps unconscious desire that is generated at the same time to come back to something greater than themselves. We go out as individuals into the world, we work for ourselves, but in the back of our mind, unconsciously, somewhere, something wants to come back and have it be part of a larger, meaningful cause. This is inherent to the human condition. Everyone has this need. And we are in a very dangerous time, I think, in history, because people do not have that meaning. They do not feel like there's something larger that they're attaching themselves to. They're sort of all at sea, trying to find something, and not often successful. And what happens is there's this vacuum that is dangerous because it will attach to something. For 1,500 years in Western civilization, there was a final resting place for our ambition. There was a concept, an ideal that everyone in the end came back to. And that was the church, the Christian ideal. This idea there's a heaven and hell and you're working for a God and you're working for the millennium. This gave that sort of conceptual structure to people's lives. But the Enlightenment killed the Christian God, and it's not coming back. So what then do people have? And the danger is, in this city particularly, is a lot of people you find are getting that there's a synthetic alternate, it's a false god, you could say, and that is the state. You imagine how we're working for the government or participating in the practice of politics, how that feels to people. You know, it's you're working with large sums of money. You're working on things that affect millions of people. You're working on policies perhaps that will last generations. This gives it comes close. It seems to fulfill that need for meaning. You feel like you're part of something greater. And this is very dangerous because we know that all of that is garbage. All of that is illusion. The state itself is the premise that we need the state in the first place is a lie. The premise that the state does anything good when it intervenes in the economy is a lie. It's all lies. And it's an illusion that these people are holding on to that they feel is giving them meaning. So this is what a life committed to liberty gives you. It will be a life of meaning and purpose. And this is not something to just scoff at, like, you know, so what? This is a very valuable commodity to have. You know, it's exceedingly rare for people to have this legitimate sense that their life is full of purpose. What you will find is that when you live a life committed to liberty, people will have this conflicting sensation towards you. On one hand, they will perhaps look down on you because on so many different scales they exceed you because they're fighting so hard for these more, say, like superficial causes, their own advancement in the world or whatever, and you are not, they beat you on those scales. So on one hand they'll look down on you, but on the other hand they will feel in you something that they don't have, that they will envy or look up to or admire. This is you will be wealthy, metaphorically speaking, in meaning compared to other people. And it's a very satisfying feeling to feel that you are working for something that is, it's higher, it's better than the values, you know, and you will wonder, what do people worry about, you know, if not liberty? I mean, that they didn't get an advancement in their job, that they're, you know, that they're not like included in some club or invited to something, like who cares, you know? Liberty is the only game in town. That's how you'll feel, you know? And everything else, like, you know, you care about it, it's important, but it's nowhere near, you know, as important as, and you'll judge people based on how they advance liberty. That will be the criteria for how you see other people and the worth that you give them. So this is the payoff of all those negative things, the life of liberty. It's real meaning. So that in and of itself, I think, is a reason to choose that life. But there's another reason too, which is that somebody has to do this. Somebody has to start fighting for liberty. And you know, the liberties that our ancestors struggled with and won over hundreds of years are being methodically removed from us, as we are in a watershed generation or generations. There's a revolution going on, and it's dangerous. And we need to stand up and say, we're not going to let this continue. You know, it's time for the people on earth to say, this nonsense that has happened for thousands of years, this is not going to continue. We are going to stand up and you know, we are the adults here, and we're not going to let you keep doing this. We need to organize ourselves and set up a system of organized education to bring people, you know, over the long run to move society in the direction we want to go of a stateless world. Commit to liberty, do it because somebody has to. Put everything else aside and say, hopefully other people will come along, you know. It's an existential threat to, the fight for liberty is a fight for existence, you know. We have to do it. I mean, it's, be a intelligent person and realize that this is the most important thing to commit your life to. So, you know, I encourage you all to redouble your efforts to, you know, proselytize the message. Try to inject in other people's stream of consciousness, the idea that, you know, we need to fight for these things are important. It will bring you meaning, and it's, in any event, it's something that is needed to be done. So I wanted to play this song to end here. It's like a, you know, it's based on a biblical idea. Eyes on the prize. It's a spiritual. They play in the civil rights movement. But it really does capture this idea of like holding a value in front of you and imagining where we're trying to go, which is a world without the state, and holding on to it despite what else is happening to your life. So that's how I would think, you know, it would be good to think about it when I play it. So let me play that, and then we'll do some questions.
All in silence, bound in jail, had no money for to go to bed. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. All in silence thought they were wrong, guns and shook and the chains come on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. Freedom's name is mighty sweet, soon worth going. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. I got my hand on the gospel why, won't take nothing for my journey now. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. hold on. Ain't been together, but I've been told the strength of their
So, what do you guys think? Any thoughts?
So in your talk, at first wasn't even sure what you were considering the negative aspects of liberty or the medicine, so to speak. You later said it's the alienation and maybe missed opportunities by not supporting the state or something like that. I don't know. I really think that because liberty is fun in pursuing your goals, and also that we can make it more fun in some ways. And I really think of a life of liberty means not just pursuing liberty as an end, but considering it a process. And then not everyone having a life of liberty doesn't mean living in your parents' basement and fighting on Facebook. You can do even a career that's not directly toward the cause of liberty, but still live a life of liberty. It's just kind of like having liberty in everything you do, and proselytizing for it, and all that kind of things. I had a conversation with this 60-year-old lady who
Was that 6 or
60-year-old lady who's she's involved in democratic politics, and we had a long conversation, and she was trying to even avoid identifying her party bias at all. She was trying to, and at one point she said, I could tell she was trying to do that. And at one point she said, well, I'm trying to keep this non-political so not to offend anyone. And I said, if I were offended by everyone that had different ideas than myself, I couldn't leave my house. So if you have that approachable attitude and understand, people have different ideas than us and we want to change that, but just because they have different ideas doesn't mean they're evil. We should look at it as they're an opportunity to convert, or maybe some people are just too far gone, but they believe they're doing good with their ideas. They believe those ideas for a reason, and they're not evil, they just are misguided. But if we have that approachable attitude, if we project success, then people will be curious, like, why is he successful? I mean, if you look at some of the more successful libertarians, like Peter Thiel or a bunch of guys in either finance or California startup companies, all this kind of stuff. If you project that kind of success, people will be turned on to the idea. Like maybe there's something to it. Maybe libertarianism isn't defined as the evil Koch brothers. So having that kind of zeal in everything we do, but a positive zeal, I think is important.
Yeah, I mean, I understand your point, and I agree with it to an extent, but I guess kind of where I was trying to go is to say there are some people, maybe it's a small percentage, it's a decent number of people who seek out what's right, who seek out justice, who are, and those people don't, saying like I'm successful, it's not what they're really going to gravitate towards, Because all they care about is what is right, you know, and what is just, you know, that's, so those are the type of people I think we want to become. We want to become the anti-state, right? This was always the idea. We are the opposition to the state, where the state is the most devious, cunning, evil, like conniving, like we are the people who really care about doing right. We are the people who really, you know, no matter what people do, and no matter whether we're successful, we are going to be there saying this is what's right, you know. And some people will eventually start realizing that and, you know, gravitate towards us, you know. So, like, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you, you know, like, all this stuff is important, like, but at what cost? You know, do you swallow your objection to the war? Do you swallow it, you know, because you are afraid somebody's not going to be appealing, you're not going to appeal to somebody, you know?
I would just decide on whether the situation is right to make those points, you know. And not everything always has to be controversial. You just have to kind of see if it's, you know, how the reception of your ideas are going to be. But kind of, yeah, like, I think we should avoid being, like we were saying on Facebook, like the leftists have this righteous indignation, like they're the only people who care about the poor in the world.
But we should have them because we're right, right?
Well,
that's the difference between them and us.
We
Is
should
that
have
our
indignation.
righteous
we should have
indignation.
zeal. We should have zeal in how we, with the, you know, that our ideas are important. But I don't know, maybe it's just my personal preference that those kinds of, that just that attitude irritates me. Like, I don't want to be surrounded by people like that because they're always, you know, downer Debbies or whatever.
Well, except that if they're right, you know, there's, so it's, you know, you think about like us, we're saying this stuff, we're saying this stuff, we're saying this stuff when everything hits the fan, and like we've been saying, you know, we were saying it when no one was listening, you know. That's
Like von Mises in 1929.
yeah, he called him, you know. And you know, I mean, we were saying it when you didn't want to hear it. We're saying it now that you're listening. You know, we're going to say it when you're not listening again. You know.
That's a good point. I mean, the life of Mises is interesting because in many ways he was antisocial, and maybe his ideas would have been more influential in his time had he been a little more positive. But he had every right to be crotchety, you know, for the persecution that he went through. So you can't really blame him for not being more approachable with his ideas, but maybe he would have been more successful. Maybe that's why Hayek is better recommended.
I completely agree. I mean, unfortunately, there's a correlation on these kinds of things. I think in the amount of time it takes to gain hold of a lot of people, you know, and the excellence of the idea. Like, that's unfortunate. That's how it is. You know,
like Copernicus and Galileo.
Yeah, like Copernicus had the idea. Galileo was 150 years later or something, right? And even then he was, you know, he was still really on the vanguard, but you know, he kind of got. So it's just, and Mises is furious. Why? Because, and why are we furious? Because we're saying this to people, and they don't have a good justification for why they support the state. You know, it's just like, I'm sorry that I'm furious about that, but like, you want to go out you want to enter into the field debate, you don't respect the rules. The field debate says when you lose, you change, you know, like, and you have to, I mean, you know what I mean, or don't even enter and just say, I'm not a thinker, and like, let me tell you what
everyone's ideas are bad.
That's what I'm, you know, it's just like.
If I may,
Yes.
I think you have more cause for optimism than you think. The idea of deifying the state is not new. In fact, we have always deified the state. The fact that it's been slowly chipped away at over the last 300 years and over the last maybe 50 years may show that rational inquiry is slowly spreading among people, and that if you were to divide action into 4 ideas, sort of the doing the wrong thing for the wrong reason, the wrong thing for the right reason, the right thing for the wrong reason, and the right thing for the right reason. Virtually every human being would understand that doing the right thing for the right reason is ethical, moral, and just, and the doing wrong things for the wrong reasons are not. The tricky part is the doing the right thing for the wrong reason and the wrong thing for the right reason.
Right.
And what you're describing in this terms of statism is usually doing the wrong thing for the right reasons. People who are trying to engage, whether that's in charity or engage in preserving what could be rights by setting up a coercive apparatus, a state, for your own good now, isn't it? That's doing the right thing for the wrong reason. And here's where things get tricky. That may be moral, but not ethical. And that brings us, again, you're trying to make people think, when most people would much prefer the simple answers provided either by religion or the state or some combination of the two, like a state church. But that over time, particularly with rising standards of living and with an amazing sort of, global network of communication, these ideas that are verifiable outside of themselves, people will suddenly look at Detroit and see that it failed for the same reasons that Czechoslovakia did. We like to think that collapse of socialism was something that was a fluke of history. We do. As you said, your sweet 60-year-old friend who didn't want to talk about politics was in many ways hiding things from you. She wants to think that Detroit isn't a failure of the state. And it's not just Detroit. It's going to happen over and over and over again when a state reaches the end of its, basically, credit and start to collapse. And then, you find yourself, like poor von Mises in 1929, saying, I wish I didn't have to say I told you so. But perhaps we can retrieve some other optimistic freethinkers and libertarians. And that although we have this sort of odd resurgence of collectivist socialism going on right now, and we do, you say, look around this town, how do you get rich? That diffused, oftentimes through things like irony, satire, a compelling story. The Warshawski brothers probably do more for a liberty movement than anyone else, with the possible exception of Penn and Teller. But you see, it made you smile, and once people smile and laugh, then they're willing to talk and debate.
That's why I think Rothbard was such a great communicator. I just love listening to his lectures.
Because he laughs at himself.
Yeah, you can tell he's having fun doing it, if you compare it to like Mises or Ayn Rand. They're these series that some people are turned off.
It's different, it's the carrot and the stick, I mean, people also respond to sharp criticism. They won't admit it because they don't like how it feels. But you definitely can get a reaction both ways, so.
I think Milton Friedman was good at that too. He both the carrot and the stick. Like he could destroy someone's argument, but he would also look like he was having fun, pleasurable to be with as a gentleman. So
the criticism that I honestly have for people who are, is they make the argument that we should all, fight together, while they criticize people who have a different approach, and I've been subjected to this many times because obviously I'm more combative in my approach, but it's just like, when I give talks, it's generally speaking the ideas, I don't sit here and be like, today I did, but usually I don't sit here and be like, you guys should be like angry, you should be, I don't say that. Now I do it, but I understand there are other ways, and I appreciate them. But other people are like just so hateful to people who are.
yeah.
And it's just like, you're the one hating, you
It's
know?
because you're stealing their idol.
How's that?
You're stealing the most, this thing of intense power that gives and takes away. All of your stories, both in the Marines and with immigration,
Right.
you're challenging something held very dear and very
Oh,
strong.
for sure.
And
That stinks. But what I'm talking about is not those. I'm talking about libertarians who criticize people who are combative in the movement and say you're not helping the movement by, telling someone like those people are much more divisive, in my opinion, than the people who attack others but not other libertarians. You know what I mean?
I see you're getting into sort of like
The internecine fighting that is like, I'm not fighting with you. I'm doing my own thing, trying to fight the state. I always have this analogy. You go to a party and you're like, you find some guy who's like advocating the state. And you're like really getting into it with him, passionate, like, not angry, but like, getting into it. And then all of a sudden, like, you have your libertarian friends who comes to you and says, like, could we not argue politics? And you're like, back me the fuck up, Like, we're going somewhere here, and like, here you are, you're supposed to believe in this stuff. I'm not saying you have to do it, but don't like get in my way, and that's what I feel a lot of times with libertarians who are critical of this, is like, you say we should all be fighting together. I agree we should all be fighting together,
I wonder if there's sort of a parallel to the relationship, say, between Richard Dawkins and Philip Pullman, when in dealing with the sort of spread of the atheist freethinker movement.
Mm-hmm.
Richard Dawkins, very combative.
Mm-hmm.
Philip Pullman, much more much more conciliatory. I wonder.
Yeah, it's interesting how I look into that. I didn't know that relationship.
So I wouldn't argue that we should never be combative.
Mhm.
I mean, I can be combative sometimes too. It just depends on either who I'm, the audience, and who I'm in the situation. And so I would just say that they're all tools in our,
Toolbox.
and we just should choose the right tool for the situation.
Mhm.
Some people, the angry satire or whatever, the Chris Cantwell's of the world,
Yeah.
that's the only tool they have.
Oh, yeah. Well, and they like take it,
Yeah, so it just depends on the situation though.
Well, Chris, you have anything to add, or? Yeah, it was a little discussion this time, since it's a small group.
Yeah.
So. I don't really know, like, the idea of this is like, have a church, so you can bring in people who are not familiar with the idea and like communicate it to them. Part of me says like maybe the better approach is just to have kind of like these discussions, because maybe people aren't going to be familiar with the ideas, or like, I don't know, maybe that would be the way to go, where we just have a group where it's like, we hang out and really go deep into these ideas, and if somebody's interested, we bring them along instead of trying to mask. I don't know. Like,
I do like the prepared talks,
yeah.
and then a Q&A session,
Mhm.
and then it just kind of should vary by group size.
Right. When there's people who are unfamiliar with these ideas, I think the Q&A is like a killer to them.
Yeah,
Because
especially inside baseball.
too much inside baseball, totally. It's just, if we could end it, maybe adjourn, go somewhere else, and get into it. The people who really want to go deep. But obviously that's an academic question today. So,
This is fun.
It's what we like, academic questions.
we do, yeah. Do you guys want to go get some lunch, or?
I'm going to end on today.
Okay.
I also have family obligations. But one of these days, I'm going to have to try and ask for lunch. But hopefully we'll run into you guys at the Libertarian.
It didn't record, man.
Flashing red button.
Yeah.
13 seconds is what we got.
Do you have the audio on that as well?
Yeah, I have audio on
Yeah, those always sound horrible from
that.
across
Well,
the room.
that's a little bit better. That camera is pretty slick, but yeah, it's not as good as this.
When I teach video
Unless
production,
I hit it, which maybe I did.
when I teach
Maybe
video
like
production,
pass it to you at lunch.
We'll see what's on there.
the
Maybe in a second.
was how I know you're all smart guys, because the first thing you use is a lav mic.
Oh, what?
When you're doing video, it's the lav mic that's
Is this
important.
a lav mic?
Yeah, that's a lav mic.
Yeah.
Lav.
Oh, yeah, it makes a huge difference. I mean,
It
it's
makes all the
so
difference.
clear.
Well, because,
You know? And over there, it's like echoing.
well, and think about it this way. If you have good audio but no video, you still have something you can use.
Right.
If you have good video, no audio, you've got a bunch of people walking around in the room.
Mhm.
No one's gonna watch it,
But thank you again,
yes. Yeah,
guys.
the audio is important for me personally, like, I like to listen to stuff like this while in the back, when, you know, playing in the background while I'm doing other stuff. But if the audio's crap, then I'm not gonna do that.
Yeah.
I want to watch the video.
You were saying, you're talking about Rothbard